Welcome
To celebrate
Polly.
Welcome to Celebrate Story.
Meanderings in motherhood. Motherhood.
With my mom.
My mom.
With my mom. With my mom.
With my wife.
Julie Wagner.
Julie Wagner. Julie Wagner.
Julie Wagner.
Excited and scared. That's how I feel about tomorrow's long run on the Greenway. I'm scheduled to do 10 miles tomorrow. And this is a part of about a 10-week training program to build up to a half marathon distance. This will be my third half marathon, and I still absolutely can't believe that it's possible to do this. It blows me away how if you add little by little, week after week, your body really can do more than you think it can do. And it blows my mind that I can do that distance. I didn't start running until my late 30s. I never saw myself as a runner. And most of my life, I didn't really see myself as an athlete. I actually connect more with an identity of knowing what it feels like to be stuck and weighed down and unmotivated. That actually is something that's a more familiar space for me. A number of years back, I heard the phrase identity controls behavior. It was spoken quickly and then unpacked by a speaker at a homeschool conference, Dr. Kathy Cook. And she was talking about how our kids will behave, and even as adults, we behave who we believe we are at the deepest level. This has just always sat with me a lot in terms of me analyzing my running story. So let me go back to the beginning. My earliest memories of me and fitness. So in 5th grade, we had what was called the Presidential Physical Fitness Challenges. We had to do things like run a mile and sprint a certain distance and try to do pull-ups, and also do what was called the V, sit, and reach. Now, ran the mile, I was last, huffing and puffing. Tried to do the pull-ups, could not even barely pull up. I mean, it was a total joke. But much to my surprise, when I sat down to do the V, sit, and reach, lo and behold, I was the best in the whole 5th grade class. Not only was I the best in the 5th grade class, I was the best in the whole 5th grade system of my school. So that earned me a trip on a bus with the other Presidential Physical Fitness Award winners from our school to the regionals. And that's where I competed as a V, sit, and reacher. And I vividly remember being with these other kids and feeling like I did not belong. I mean, these guys and girls could run miles and do pull-ups. My claim to fame, what got me on the bus, was actually quite embarrassing to tell people when they would ask why I was there. Well, I'm a V-sit and reacher. So that was kind of the beginning of my identity as an exerciser. I was more the V-sit and reach type. Fast forward to middle school, I fell in love with cheerleading. It was so much fun. It was a real place of belonging for me. And I loved the pyramids. To this day, I have 8 children. To this day, for fun family get-togethers, they know the way to have me over the moon excited about the whole event as if we could build a pyramid together. Well, okay, so in cheerleading, I had this constant battle my first year with my coach. She always wanted me to put my hands on my hips, well, because every other girl was putting their hands on their hips while in between cheers, and I refused to do it. I absolutely refused to do it. She looked at it as kind of like Julie must be, back then we didn't really use the term ADD or ADHD a lot, but I'm sure she looked at it as Julie's just forgetting. And she would remind me again and again and again to put my hands on my hips. And again and again and again, I would put my hands flat down beside my side because it was intentional. Because see, let me talk to you about the uniforms. We had the typical cheerleading skirt, and then we had a bib style letter on the front, but then underneath it was a t-shirt. And it was the worst cotton t-shirt in the history of all cotton t-shirts that would show every drop of sweat. And since I was in 8th grade, at the height of that insecurity stage about all changes in my body, it was shameful to me to have these huge pit stains underneath my arms. So the greatest tragedy was when pep rally came up, and I thought, what am I going to do with these huge sweat stains? You know, you just envision when you're in 8th grade that everyone's looking at it. So I pulled together this elaborate system involving lots and lots of Scotch tape, additional cotton t-shirt material from an old t-shirt, and did this system underneath my armpits. So literally when I would move my arms all around in the cheers, I could hear the crinkling from underneath my armpits. And the worst thing was, at the end of that pep rally, it didn't work. All I had was Scotch tape burns underneath my armpit, and it seemed as if I was doubly sweaty from the extra heat underneath my arms. It really is funny what we'll do to hide our shame. It would be years until I would do as Kristen Armstrong says, embrace my sweat, and find out that it really was my essence, my emancipation. In college, I exercised here and there to impress Steve, but really there was never a real rhythm that I found in my life to exercise. It was more a chore, a duty, something I should be doing. Somewhere in my mid-30s, it was right after Zayden was born, my 6th child, we started to get into a rhythm of going to the YMCA. At the time, my oldest was super excited about exercise and lifting weights and all that involved. And so his enthusiasm really did drag me there. And the real payoff for me was it gave me time and space to think. I would just walk around the track, sometimes attempt to run, and just have finally this space in my brain that I needed to think and breathe and be. God bless those YMCA workers that held my babies week after week, week after week. Well, about this same time that I would get into this regular habit and getting the time and space to exercise at the YMCA was also processing and grieving and weeping over my nephew. See, my nephew Silas about that time had been ill with a rare genetic autoimmune condition that actually had his immune system attack his brain. He was a little over 1 year old when this happened, and it was a rapidly progressing disease that left him to the point where he could not walk, he could not talk, and he could not move his arms and legs. This was nothing short of devastating, a reckoning of sorts, not only for my sister, but for me. I am continually struck by what this grief has done to her and how it gives her a lens to see my babies and to see the abundance in ways that I just can't see. She's been known to just walk over to 6 water bottles that were stacked up under the counter and take a picture of it and see the beauty in it. Grief does that, right? If we let it, it softens us. Well, I would be walking around the track, and I vividly remember just praying and crying over, here she has this little boy who cannot walk and talk, and it looks like on this side of heaven he won't be healed. Because, of course, we desperately stormed the heavens for prayers for healing for him. And I was like, what do you do with that? What do you do with the fact that I have 6 children walking and talking in 6 different directions that I cannot keep up with? And it looks like her little boy is not going to learn on this side of heaven to regain the function of his arms and legs. I remember going to visit her, and she toured us around. It was when he moved. It got to the point where his medical needs were so great that he moved into this really great home called St. Mary's, to where my sister could go and be the mom. And then he could have all of his just countless critical medical needs taken care of. And we were touring this new place that he was at. And of course, all my kids had tons of questions and really were absorbing, because some of my middle kids at the time, who were preschool age, didn't quite understand that he couldn't walk and talk. And so they kept asking different questions about what he can do. And I'll never forget her looking at them with such intense gratitude and joy and peace, and said, he can smile. And I'm so grateful that he can smile. So I think as I have processed and grieved and wept over Silas not being able to use his legs, is what made space between the I can't run and I can run. Because I always believed I can't run. And I evaluated this with absolutely zero critical thinking and just evaluated that I was last and out of breath. And so I was bad at it. Now, around the same time, a friend of mine came to visit, and she was on her second week of Couch to 5K. And she was like, went to the YMCA with us that day, and our kids are all playing in the basketball gym together, and our older kids. And she was like, well, why don't you just do the second week with me? And I was like, there's no way I could do that. I can't run. And so she convinced me to just try the second week. I immediately took off with all the gusto I had because I didn't want to fail at this second week training with her. Her immediate instructions were to slow down. So I did slow down. She told me again, slow down. She must have told me 4 separate times to slow down. And she said, you've got to go at a pace that you can go this entire, I think it was 2 minutes for that training day. You've got to find a pace that you can go at the entire 2 minutes. This blew my mind. I didn't realize we could find our own pace on this thing. So before I knew it, the end of the training session completed. We did our 4 or 5 intervals of running and walking, and I did it. It truly did surprise me. So I promptly came home, told Steve all about it, and he absolutely was 100% on board. And before I knew it, I'm trying to catch up with him on our intervals around our neighborhood and trying to keep up with him on those longer and longer runs. I remember going to the Y when it was the week that we had to do 11 minutes because we were like, let's go there because it's flat on the track and that'll be so much easier than if we run in our neighborhood. And I really had doubts that my body could do 11 minutes. So this was the journey of practicing a reverence for what my body could do rather than a judgment and shame for what it couldn't do. More of an exercise and a practice in compassion and celebration for my body. Well, we went on to complete that whole training program, did our 5K. I was so proud of how I did that day. I was beaming. I couldn't believe it. And, you know, that race led to another race, which led to another race. And before I knew it, I was doing race after race, you know, as often as we could squeeze into our busy family life. And the best part is we were getting more and more shirts. So more races, more shirts. And that to me was really important because I loved wearing these shirts and I loved looking in the mirror and seeing that I was a runner. Going back to that idea that identity controls behavior. The more I could see that I was a runner and had these shirts and these medals, the more I could believe that I was a runner. And so it really did blow my mind that it was all about pacing and slowing down to know my actual pace of what I could sustain over a period of time. Somewhere in that time period, as I was building up from 5Ks to 10Ks to half marathons, I was reading in book club a book called On Living by Carrie Egan. And it struck me because she has this job where she is a hospice chaplain and she is visiting people at the last days, moments, weeks of their lives. And one thing that really sticks with me, even, 5 years later after reading that book, is undoubtedly one of the most consistent things she would hear from people at the end of their life is I'll read the quote. Here's the quote. There are many regrets and many unfulfilled wishes that patients have shared with me in the months or weeks before they die. But the time wasted spent hating their bodies, ashamed, abusing it, or letting abused. The years, decades, or in some cases whole lives that people spent not appreciating their body until they were so close to leaving it are some of the saddest. It's something other people teach us to feel about our bodies. Either way, the result of the message is the same. Lives lived thinking that bodies are something to criticize, to despise, or at best something to tolerate. A problem that cannot be solved. Those words are haunting to me because I see that and I feel that. I think back to the girl who was hiding her sweaty armpits. Another book that I read around that same time was a book called 26.2 Reasons Women Run. And when I read those words that I mentioned earlier that she said to embrace your sweat, it's your essence and emancipation. I love the way that she used the word emancipation, because to me, that's very much how I felt when I would get into these rhythms of running, a sense of freedom. I remember being at the YMCA, and I would run outside at this YMCA. It was the one in Harrisburg, because my kids would be in childcare inside. And I remember a friend would be like, okay, like, which way are you going? And it was always so baffling to me because I couldn't tell her whether I'd go right or left or what track I would go, because really I started to run for the sheer joy and pleasure and freedom of going left when I want to go left, going right when I want to go right, and no one's asking me why I go left. See, at that point I'd had 7 children. And, with 7 children, they are my life's work. However, at the same time, going from like here to across the street can be so heavy and hard when you have so many different voices that need to be cared for and kept safe. And so running to me was a way to feel lighter, a way to feel freedom, a way to go wherever I felt like going, a way to feel the wind in my face. And I'm not always perfect at it. I'm not always every single second I'm running feeling like a total rainbows and butterflies experience. But it's a practice to cultivate a spirit of reverence that today my legs can carry me in a run. Today my lungs can carry my breath needed to go uphill. Today my knees are strong. Bodies that work the way we want them to work are not guaranteed for us. It's a privilege. And so I try really, really hard to practice that idea, because I spent far too long not exercising and beating myself up for it in most of my adult life before I found running. And before I learned there's a great space between I can do something and I can't, which is what Silas taught me, I don't want to take it for granted. So it's a practice of celebration. A few more quotes that I want to share with you from Kristen, because it really bridges into the last thing I want to talk about is mental health and running. I think one of the biggest reasons that I keep running is what it does for my mental health. I've often joked that I have to run off the crazy. Kristen Armstrong said this so beautifully. She said she runs to burn up what she doesn't need, and she runs to ignite what she does. Another quote I love is how running transcends the body, and then it transcends the mind, and then what you're left with bare is the soul. This is so true for me. Nothing can get me to a place of honesty, of raw, true honesty about where I am in my life, like running. See, most of my life, I live at such a rapid and insane pace. Like literally every day I'm working on, I'm going to try to chew and taste my food today. And so ironically, running becomes this space where the soul can be laid bare. Like once I get into that rhythmic state of at my pace, going at my pace for my time limit, I can strip away all of those extra monkey mind things that just rattle around in my brain. So the last person I want to introduce you to is John Rady. He wrote a book on exercise in the brain called Spark. And here are 2 of his quotes. And I know them to be true because I have experienced them with every cell of my body. 1, the mechanisms by which exercise changes how we think and feel are so much more effective than donuts, medicine, and wine. Exercise is a powerful method of generating a spark. It lights on fire every level of our brain. He goes through and he talks about like every part of our body, every system in our body is revved up and it's at its best performance, from learning to muscles to our cardiovascular system, everything. He goes into so much depth. It all is at optimal peak performance with exercise. We were made to move. So how did this thing like movement is this gift, this privilege, and this joy to experience. How do we get it so wrapped up into shame and fear and competition? And don't get me wrong, I love a good competition. I love a good comparison. I know it's really popular to be like, comparison, it's the thief of joy. Just stay focused on you. I don't buy that one, because I have found in my own life, in not just my exercise journey, but in all of my life, that comparisons done really, really well can encourage me like nothing else. Like, here's an example. I remember listening to a podcast by this lady named Rosie Swale Pope. She was a woman in her late 50s when grieving the loss of her husband from prostate cancer. She decided that instead of sitting at home and crying about it, which I'm sure she did, there's a time for tears. She decided she would run around the world, because then she could get the world's attention about early screening for prostate cancer. Now, I don't have any plans to run around the world, but all you have to do is hear 5 minutes of Rosie's vivacious, bubbly, energetic, just beyond comprehension enthusiasm for the joy of running. And you can't help but compare it to your own level of the way you look at running. So I am all for a good comparison. Now, the last story I want to share, I think I've said that like 3 times. The last story I want to share is there was a woman in John Rady's book, in the book, The Spark, that I mentioned earlier. She was jump roping, and she jump roped her way out of a depression. This just blows my mind, because it's so easy, going back to talking about comparisons and competition. It's like, it's so easy to compare in a negative way, in a way that beats ourselves up or shames ourselves or makes ourselves feel worse about what we're doing. But if we can compare in a way that practices compassion for ourselves and reverence for these amazing bodies that we're not guaranteed to have tomorrow, the comparison can be a source of great inspiration. Who would have thought one could jump rope their way out of a depression? I get that. I think I'm not alone in saying that the last few years, where's the ground? Like Esther Perel said, how do we stay grounded when the ground is moving? Trying to take things one step at a time. So much rapid change, so much uncertainty, both personally and for everyone over the last few years. And I've lost count of how many mornings I take it one step at a time. It's like my only goal is to get on my tennis shoes. And then my only goal is to get to the mailbox. To set very, very small goals that I keep crushing as a celebration of what I can do. And somewhere along the run, things shift in my brain in a way that is mysterious. That what I thought felt impossible, I now know that one step at a time, it is possible. So that's what I wanted to share, because that's what I want to keep practicing for the rest of my life. On the way home from Zoe's softball game the other night, after watching her play softball, I'm so proud and excited whenever I get to see my kids play a new sport. And we're walking out and I was like, it just seems satisfying to hit the ball with the bat. Is it like so satisfying, Zoe? And she's like, yeah. And I was like, I want to try that sometime. And my husband was like, let's do it. Let's do it right now. There's an empty softball field right there. So before I knew it, before anyone could say no, my husband, myself, and Zoe and Zane were at the softball field, and he's pitching me pitches for the pleasure of hitting the ball. And then it was for the pleasure of running to the base. And so we had this quick little 2-on-2 game, quick little burst of joy for the celebration of what we could do. I'm doing this podcast on movement and how we were made to move and to revive a sense of reverence and enjoyment in moving. How do you most love to move? How do you most love to exercise?
I love movement because I love the feeling when I either do a 175-pound squat or win a race swimming.
Big the pool.
My favorite way to move my body is football because when I'm the running back, I feel like I have a lot of the power and I can get down the field.
I like winning my friends. That's how I move my body.
My favorite way to move is football because it pushes me to be my best self.
My favorite way to exercise is weightlifting because it's easy to see your progress both in your numbers and in your body.
What I love about swimming is that you don't have to be that good at it to start it. You just have to keep working at it to get better at it. Can I go play outside with my friends?
Well, I focused on running a lot in some of these stories because that's my jam. That's my zone. But I really do want to practice this reverence and this celebration to every way to move. So it obviously extrapolates to yoga and softball and swimming. In fact, 6 years ago, when we moved into the neighborhood that we're in now, it was the first opportunity my kids got to be involved in a neighborhood swim team. So my oldest, I think it was my oldest 5 at the time, joined the swim team, loved it. At the end of the season, we had championships downtown in this huge facility, Mecklenburg Aquatic Center, that had 3 giant pools. I think they're Olympic-sized pools. And this season has a special magic when I remember it. I don't know if it was the fact that it was a brand new sport that my kids were excited about, brand new neighborhood, and of course, and including a brand new baby. In the middle of this season, my 7th baby was born, Ezra. So we're downtown at these championships, and we're in this huge facility that has 3 giant size Olympic swimming pools, and I'm nursing my newborn, Ezra. They started the whole meet off with the national anthem, and what caught my attention a few rows ahead was this man who looked kind of soldier-like, handsome soldier, put his hand on his chest, did the national anthem, and then we sat down, and I'm like trying to get a good look at where the championships are and if my kids are starting, in some of the first races or where they're at, and then my attention starts to drift back to the center pool of this soldier-looking young man, and I watched him take off his legs. He had prosthetic legs, and I watched him hop into the pool, and then I watched him swim length after length after length after length. This captivated my attention, and it was in that moment that I was like, I am going to learn how to swim. Here I'd just watched my own children over the course of 6 weeks learn 4 different strokes, and even my oldest at the time learn how to do flip turns underneath the water. And in that moment, I knew I am going to learn how to swim. And so I did. I set out to learn the strokes and learn how to swim. And I often want to tell that story because I typically use Adult Swim in my neighborhood pool for getting in maybe a 250-yard swim. Because if we're there for 3 hours, all of a sudden I've got a 30-minute workout. I don't do it every time, but it's a great way for me to take advantage of that small sliver of time and enjoy moving my body. And I'll never forget one time when I came up from a length of a friend of mine was like, I wish I could do that. I can't swim. And that's where things like this podcast are birthed, because I thought, if I could just tell you how I used to think I can't swim. I get the privilege to help direct and the burden my neighborhood swim team. This past summer, I would take the microphone for the 1 minute before the whole meet started, And I'd beg the entire swim team in my most passionate, my most pleading voice for them all to enjoy their swim and to make that their personal best the goal. Because they're going to lose the first place ribbon. They're going to lose the second place ribbon. That's going to be long gone, but for the rest of their lives, they'll be able to develop and build and maintain a joy of going in and out of the water. And so I begged them all to just keep swimming.
Oh, hey, you're still here. Well, thanks for listening. If you enjoyed the podcast, can you do me a favor? Can you subscribe or follow in the feed you're listening to? And maybe even leave a review if you're so inclined. As we get rolling, this will be a work in progress and a work of experimentation. There will be episodes like the one you heard today, plus interviews and discussions on a wide-ranging variety of topics. You can also find links to Julie's Facebook and Instagram page at celebratestorypod.com. Again, thanks for listening to Celebrate Story.